Greetings and welcome there, academic proletariat. This is Mr. Olson coming at you with this rendition of the Fireside Chats, where we will be talking about one of the worst relationships in American history, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. These two guys set America on a path in the 1790s to be pretty similar to what it is today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this. I just want to remind you that there is a guided note sheet that goes along with this video to help you understand it a little bit better. The top of the first page looks like that. It's available to my classes on our Schoology page. If you don't have access to it, go ahead and shoot me an email and I will grant you the access that you desire. Okay, so we're going to start with the Constitution, and in basic terms, the Constitution was left by the framers to be ambiguous. It's ambiguous on purpose because the Founding Fathers thought that if they left it ambiguous, the Constitution could be changed and manipulated to fit the times a little bit better. So the idea that the document could change with times. One of the best examples of the Constitution being ambiguous is the so-called elastic clause. Now, when you think of things that are elastic, one of the first things that might come to mind is a rubber band. When you stretch a rubber band, it gets bigger, right? Well, the elastic clause, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, says that Congress shall have the power to make laws that are necessary and proper. I cannot stress enough how important this phrase is, necessary and proper. This is the phrase in the Constitution that people have been fighting over since its inception in the late 1780s. Because what I think is necessary and proper is definitely not what Donald Trump thinks is necessary and proper. So we're going to differ over that. So now when you think of elastic, you might think of, say, waistbands on pants, right? Because after Thanksgiving, for example, you want your pants to stretch, or perhaps after eating a gallon of ice cream, which you shouldn't do as a devil food, you want your pants to stretch. You can fit more into it. So some politicians stretch the elastic clause to fit more in. I don't want you to confuse the elastic clause with Santa Claus. That would be bad, although he might have an elastic band on his pants. Okay, anyway, so after the Constitution was ratified and George Washington became the first president, he set up a group of advisors that would help him make decisions and sort of help him oversee the country. He called this his cabinet, or it's been known as the cabinet ever since. So the president's cabinet is a group of advisors is sort of tasked with assisting him in various ways. Washington's first cabinet included some heavy hitters of the day. His Secretary of the Treasury would be Alexander Hamilton, one of the foremost finance guys in America at the time. Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson, which all know is claimed to fame as writing the Declaration of Independence. And then finally, his Secretary of War was going to be Henry Knox. The Secretary of the Treasury, as you might well imagine, was responsible for dealing with money issues. The Secretary of State deals with foreign policy, and the Secretary of War, of course, deals with defense. Now, issues came up immediately between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton because they both had different views on how the nation should develop. And so having prominent government positions and that they were both in Washington's cabinet, these different views sort of came to a head. And this division that would arise because of these two guys would sort of shape the 1790s. So let's talk a little bit about their visions. Let's start with Alexander Hamilton first. Alexander Hamilton was, by the 1790s, an elitist. So when it came to dealing with the people, he thought that common people were mere sheep. They would not blindly follow a leader and, aren't able to think on their own. They're not well educated. They're not well born. They should not be given the right to govern. Rather, the rich elite and well born should be given the right to govern. Therefore, voting qualifications should be raised, making it harder for commoners to vote. If commoners can't vote, then they can't make stupid decisions and vote in people that might hurt the aristocracy. With regard to the government, Alexander Hamilton favored a strong central government, which was evidenced by his dislike of the Bill of Rights. He thought that the Bill of Rights weakened the power of the national government and gave a little bit more power to individuals in the states. He didn't like that. He wanted to see more federal employees employed by the government because he likes the government to be big. Now, this is a key point. He had a loose interpretation of the Constitution. So what we mean by that is that elastic clause, he thought that it could be stretched. So, for example, and we're going to come back to this example in a little bit, he thought that there should be a national bank. It doesn't say anything about the national bank in the Constitution, but he said that using that elastic clause, you could stretch it to include a national bank. Now, on the economy, which is probably Alexander Hamilton's claim to fame, he wanted the economy to be based on industrial and manufacturing type of production. And to facilitate this, he put forth a 5-point economic plan. Knowing the 5 points of his economic plan isn't necessarily the most important thing this year. If you know them, great. If you know a couple of them, that's awesome. If you know one of them, you should be in the clear. Okay, so the first one was that the government should fund payment of national and foreign debt, which means that it should pay off as much debt as possible that had already existed, because that would establish credit worthiness and it would make other countries want to invest in the United States. He would also assume state debts, which means states that had been debt encumbered after the Revolutionary War. He wanted the federal government to take over those debts. Now, in order to facilitate this new economic plan, he wanted to create a Bank of the United States, which would house all the money that rich people in other countries would invest in the United States. It would also house all the money from a whiskey tax, which he would institute on that product. An excise tax is a tax on a specific product. So today there's an excise tax on cigarettes. Back then, Alexander Hamilton wanted to put an excise tax on whiskey because he wanted to raise money. He also wanted to establish a tariff, which means a tax on imported goods. We're going to come back to that time and time again, so hopefully by the end of the year you'll know what that is. He wanted to establish a tariff to protect domestic manufacturing. If I make foreign goods more expensive, people are going to be more likely to buy domestic goods. With regard to foreign affairs, this is pretty easy. He wanted a big national government, which points to him favoring strong relations with Britain because they had a strong national government. And then finally, he thought France was bad, and he thought that their revolution bordered on anarchy. So now, if you can take all of Alexander Hamilton's ideas and think of the polar opposite, you're going to get to Thomas Jefferson, who's next. On the people, Thomas Jefferson had deep faith in commoners, and he wanted to lower voting qualifications. He thought that common people were able to make decisions and that they should be trusted more. They should be empowered with more governmental stake. With regard to the government, he wanted to see a weak central government. He wanted strong state governments, which was evidenced by his support of the Bill of Rights. He wanted to reduce the number of federal employees, which means a smaller military. With regard to the Constitution, he was a strict constructionist, or he had a strict interpretation of the Constitution, thinking that it should be taken at face value. You should only interpret the Constitution based on what it specifically says. If it doesn't say anything about a bank, you can't put a bank in there. Before I say anything on this slide, I want you to take a look at this picture. If ever on an exam you see this picture, I want you to immediately associate this picture with the Democratic Republicans or the Jeffersonian Republicans or Thomas Jefferson's ideals, because it is a farm, and that's what he was into. So on the economy, he thought that agriculture should be the mainstay of the American economy, its pillar, if you will. He believed in small-scale markets, and he wanted to limit foreign trade. He also wanted no national bank and no excise taxes, because those are examples of big government. With regard to foreign affairs, Thomas Jefferson favored strong relations with France because he saw France and its revolution as being great because it was the commoners overthrowing the aristocracy. So one more word on the interpretations of the Constitution, and I realize now that you can't really see this slide all that well, but the top is all that matters. Jefferson wanted to take the Constitution at face value. Okay, he wanted to make sure that you stuck to just what it said, nothing else. Hamilton, on the other hand, thought that you could interpret things as being necessary and proper that weren't necessarily in the Constitution. So, for example, something like Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. There's nothing in the Constitution about the government providing health care, but if the politicians and Congress especially deem it necessary and proper, they can make a law with regard to that. So these two views lead to the emergence of two separate political parties and sort of the beginning of the party system that will eventually become ingrained and sort of organize American politics. So the first party, those that subscribed to Alexander Hamilton's views, were known as the Federalists, not to be confused with the Federalists that like the Constitution. These are new Federalists. So these Federalists supported Alexander Hamilton. They mostly were bankers, merchants, wealthy farmers, people who would benefit from the government being involved in the economy. Most of these Federalists were located in the Northeast because that's where a lot of manufacturing was and where the manufacturing capacity was, and along the Atlantic coast because that's where the merchants were. On the other hand, the Republicans, or as some books call them, the Democratic Republicans, those are the ones who supported Thomas Jefferson. They were mostly small-scale shop owners, artisans, small farmers, and frontiersmen. Most of them could be found in the South and in the Southwest. So these were the supporters of Jefferson and Hamilton, and they subscribed to the ideas that we've already laid out that came from Jefferson and Hamilton, and these ideas would sort of be at odds with one another for at least the next 35 years in American politics. So that, in a nutshell, is Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Hopefully now you better understand the differences of them. That's all the time I have for today. Peace.